sessions in people's homes. And then some of the time I'd have them sessions in my office. But now I don't do direct practice in my community mental health work, and in my private practice, I don't go to people's homes. They come to me, or we're online, depending on what's going on in the world.
Yeah. Have you had to do a lot of Zoom sessions lately because of all the
Yeah.
craziness? Yeah,
Mhm.
me too.
Yeah.
It's been
Which,
interesting.
when you're working with like 3-year-olds, it's not so fun to like talk on, like do play on Zoom when if you can see, I have a lot of fun toys and games and stuff. And so like they know it and they want to play Play-Doh with me, or they want to, read the books I have, and you could read on Zoom, but it's different.
It
So
is. I've had to create games and like do all kinds of crazy stuff on Zoom because we were for like a year and a half and we still had to treat, right?
yeah.
So it was interesting for sure. So
Mhm.
but we had to be really, really creative and think outside the box. So it's been interesting, but it's still happening. So my students are still virtual for, we don't know. We're kind of waiting to hear from CSUN when we can go back to campus, because this class is actually supposed to be in person, but we'll see. So state of the world is still what it is. So
Flexibility is important.
very much so. All right, let's get into our next question. It is from Riley. She said, what is the difference between getting an MFT and a social work degree? And then compared to psychiatry and elementary school counseling.
Cool. Well, I have not done my MFT degree, so I'll let Nikki talk about her. Dr. Miss Webb. I don't know what you go. I call her.
Not
Nikki,
a doctor, so just
I know I didn't say doctor.
Webb.
I meant to say like Miss, teacher, whatever, professor, whatever you need to go through. And I apologize for being so familiar, but I will not speak to the MFT degree. But from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, MSW has kind of a wider net that it casts, right? So it does talk about like I took a class on like a social work and social justice class, and I took a class on diagnosing, and then I took a class on development, and so that some of those things are the same, right? I believe in MFT programs. You take classes on development, but training is not specifically to becoming like a practitioner or a clinician. You have to specialize in that. You get additional, like you kind of focus your training in your MSW degree for clinical work if that's where you want to go. Because you could also take the direction of doing macro work, right? Like policy and grant writing and program evaluation and implementation. And there's classes and courses for that direction too. Or you have a class, or you have a specialization in working with older adults, right? So you have kind of the foundational courses about kind of why, what's the history, and how you can be in the world as a social worker today. And then you go towards your specialization, but it doesn't gear towards private practice.
And I'll chime in on the MFT end too. So what Kelsey is saying is much more focused on a system, right? A systems approach more so in the community and those types of things. And MFT is really going to look at the family specifically, and and not saying that Kelsey doesn't, is that our focus is a little bit different in the MFT realm. It's more about your specific like living situation, who you're with, as opposed to the kind of bigger whole in a community aspect. So, but it also, even as MFTs, some people have different styles, right? Or different theoretical orientations that kind of dictate how you do therapy. I will say that the coursework that I took as a licensed, as a marriage family therapist, is much more counseling heavy and much more clinical in that way, as opposed to like, I didn't do any like social justice kind of classes. It was much more about couples therapy, group therapy, how to do individual counseling, how to work with families and children in a different realm. So it was much more focused on that piece, as opposed to kind of what Kelsey is saying is a little bit more of the community feel. Not saying that I wouldn't take in the community, because I feel like that has a major impact on where you come from and lots of those things. It's just kind of like a different way of conceptualizing your clients. So yeah,
I would agree with that too. And to be fair, there's MFTs that have very similar styles as me, and we have these kind of conversations, and cultural implications and, the environmental context is in all of our conversations, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't do those things if you're an MFT, or if you're an MSW, you don't do couples work, or you don't do individual or family therapy. I personally do not do couples work because it's not in my interest.
Me neither.
But I am a clinical social worker, right? And that's what I do. For, you said psychiatry, you actually need a medical degree. So psychiatrists prescribe medication. So you kind of got to go through the medical school avenue if you want to become a psychiatrist. Psychologists,
That's what I meant, psychologist, not
Okay.
psychiatrist.
Yeah. I mean, we're all in the same, we're all friends. Psychologists, they get a higher level of degree. So they get a PhD or they get a PsyD, which is a doctorate of psychology. And psychologists, some psychologists do direct practice as well, and they do therapy. But a lot of psychologists either do, if you get a PhD, a lot of it is research-based. If you get a PsyD, then it is clinical-based. But typically the role that they do is they do psychological testing, is one of the things that is unique to psychologists. So, if you say, did that child get tested? Those are the people that are doing the tests. So they do, like tests on their attention and their, cognitive capacities and their social emotional capacities and all of these different things. As an MSW or an MFT, we can do assessments, but we're not doing psychological testing. They also can diagnose autism for Medi-Cal to get it reimbursed. We can diagnose, but in Medi-Cal, it has to be diagnosed by a psychologist, a pediatrician, a nurse practitioner, or a psychiatrist.
And it's the same for regional center too. So regional center now is doing something where a psychologist would have to do something called the ADOS. So it's basically the autism diagnostics systems. I don't even know what the acronym stands for right off the top of my head, but basically it's the kind of going standard for how do we diagnose children with autism right now. And it will tease out other things like just a communication disorder or things like ADHD or what have you. So that's kind of the going standard. They weren't doing that before. I think it's much better that they are now. So we haven't really talked a whole lot about Regional Center yet in this class, but Regional Center is a state funded nonprofit that will give folks that have children or even young adults services that are paid for by the state of California to do, like what Kelsey was saying earlier, like applied behavior analysis. So that is typically going to be funded either by Regional Center or insurance, private insurance now. And now Medi-Cal is also taking on some of those aspects as well. So it just depends on kind of what the diagnosis is and what we're seeing with the child. And there's different times where Kelsey could come in and be doing therapy, but then the child also still gets ABA services or speech, speech and language, or they get occupational therapy. So depending on the child, they could be seeing a number of different therapists, right, that are working with the child and doing different kinds of therapies. So I know it's confusing, right? So, but that's why we're talking about all these things. I think the next class we talk about clinical psychology as well, because then there's clinical psychology, but then there's also school psychology. So, and which is very different. So, so there's all kinds of different professions that are still therapists in different capacities that we'll talk about throughout this course. I want to be mindful of your time, Kelsey, because I know you are a very, very busy lady. So I just wanted to see if we had any other questions because I know we're hitting about half an hour of your time.
I have a question, Professor. Yeah. So how do you just shared about a young girl with that, she's been going through a lot. How do you, because I'm very emotional. So how do you take care of yourself so that it doesn't affect you? Because I'm sure you've heard many different cases. Like for me, being in the classroom with children that have been diagnosed, it's me helping them complete a task. It's totally different than you hearing and seeing. So how do you take care of yourself?
Yeah, that is a great question. I will say it takes practice. My first few years working in community mental health, and I would have what we call vicarious trauma, which is, I would have trauma responses to hearing my client stories, meaning I wouldn't be able to focus on anything else. I would wake up and I would wake up crying, because I'd be thinking, like, having dreams about my clients, right? Because, you're in this profession because you care, and, you care about people and want to help them. So one, it's not something that people can generally do perfectly right from the beginning. One of the best ways that I take care of myself within my work setting is supervision. So reflective supervision is kind of an area of supervision that infant and early childhood mental health professionals utilize. But I argue no matter what age you're working with, reflective supervision is wonderful. It's a way of like thinking about your thinking and thinking about how you're showing up in the sessions, right? So really confiding in my supervisors. I can't tell you how many times I've cried in supervision, and that's okay. Like, it's good that you're in touch with your emotions. Like, when people say I'm too emotional, I say, no, you're not. Emotions are what make us human. So utilizing my professional supports in supervision and talking about that. It was so hard for me to hear that thing. And I just feel so angry at that family for leaving that child or neglecting that child in the way that they did. And it's hard for me to want to talk to that Karen. It's hard for me to want to talk to that parent, right? And so supervision is huge. Second off is stopping work when work is done. Especially it's been harder when you are in the computer, like if you're on the computer and doing those things, because it's much easier to keep doing work and do all those things while you're cooking dinner or whatever. But I started doing a ritual where I would shut my computer and I'd say, that's done. And say, thank you, computer, for getting me through a day. And I know that sounds silly, but I needed to have that ritual to trigger my brain, no more. It is 6 p.m. and I am done. And then I do something enjoyable, and whether it's something that is relaxing for me, watching a TV show where I can dissociate and just chill out for an hour and a half, or it's having dinner with my loved ones and playing with kids that, are healthy and are thriving, or, reading a book or having a glass of wine but really trying to separate what is work and what is me. And I give myself at work, but I also need to give back to me when I'm done with work. Right. Going for a walk. Also, if I can take breaks during the day, I do it. And don't follow, do as I say, not as I do, right? Take breaks and take walks and call a friend and, eat and, right? Take your bio breaks whenever you need to, because those small things do add up.
Yeah. Also, a lot of clinicians will have their own therapists,
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I do as well.
Yeah.
So, it's and we do talk about, some of what Kelsey is saying is some of those really high level clients that we keep ruminating ourselves on, right? Is that we bring that into our own therapy as well and process that. Supervision is one thing, with your supervisor, but if you have your own private therapist, many of us as clinicians, I would actually say most clinicians have their own therapist as well. So, which is very helpful, right? Because it is tough. It is tough to keep doing some of this stuff and rehearing some of these things and almost traumatizing yourself, like Kelsey is saying. But we got to do it every day, right? Because we're good at what we do for a reason, and we're there for our clients. But we're only there for our clients if we take care of ourselves first, right? So that's how a lot of clinicians are able to kind of do that as well. And I cannot say that word right now. We compartmentalize, there we go. Very similarly, like nurses or doctors or even firefighters, there is a thing that we have to, like Kelsey's talking about, turning your brain off, right, in certain regards. And it does take practice. It is hard to not get wrapped up into what you're doing, but that's where that supervision and kind of all of these other self-care pieces that she's talking about are huge. So yeah, that's a great question, Evelyn, too. Thank you for asking that one. So
I'll add one more thing. Is celebrate the small victories. That also really helps me, right? Earlier in a session, I had a client that every little thing that didn't go her way, she literally was just bursting into tears and trying to kick her mom. And then at one point, she took a turn. And, you know, and I was like, this was great, you know, and she was able to say, what do you like to play? Or something like that, where she reciprocated something, which is huge. And I took the time to stop in that session and acknowledge that and go back and tell the parents, like, that was incredible. Like, that was a shift. And I go back and say, okay, that's a new skill. Right. Or, you know, if a client has a significant trauma history and they haven't been able to talk about it, and they were able to even hear me talk about it without significant distress, I go home and I go, that was amazing. Right. And really be thinking about the small shifts, because those are victories. And, you know, small things lead up to big things. But being able to identify what's going well also sustains you.
Yeah.
And take
Awesome.
vacations.
Yes, vacation. So Kelsey's very good about having her boundaries. That's another thing. A big thing is having your boundaries, right? And like she's saying with the computer, okay, 6 o'clock, I'm done, right? Turning it off, we're over and done with. But the same thing on vacation, turn your phone off, right? And you're saying, I am not available, right? You know, and so obviously with safety nets in place for some of those higher needs clients, but you know, being able to do that and unplugging and just being able to really just have your time, right? Whatever that may be. So Kelsey, during the summer, we were doing some trainings and she's like, look, I'm going to be on a houseboat and I'm gone. Like, you cannot get a hold of me. I'm like, great, cool, good. We'll talk when you get back. Right. So, you know, and just having those kind of strong boundaries with your clients, as well as even people you work with, as well as the families. I think that that's a huge, huge part of a really great clinician, is those boundary setting kind of skills too. So,
yeah.
All right. I do want to be mindful of your time. So if anybody has any more questions, if we get maybe like one more in, if anybody has another question for Kelsey, if not, I'm going to let her go for today, but thank you too. I do appreciate you coming in. I love working with you, you know that. So, and I, you know, it's really cool to have my students be able to have that time with you. So I appreciate you fitting us in today.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. And I am so pleased to be able to be here with all of you. I also love working with you too. If Please feel free, you know, Nikki, you have my website, my website, but also my email. And if anyone has questions, like follow-up questions, or want to connect about infant and early childhood mental health, or kind of what that looks like, feel free to email me. I can't guarantee I'm going to get right back to you the same day. I'll do my best, but please feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to do that. I had a lot of people kind of giving me some support and guidance during my undergrad and graduate programs, and I'd like to give that back. So please don't hesitate.
Yeah, my other 250 class, they don't get the luxury of having you live. They get to watch this. They're going to be watching what we're saying right now tomorrow. But you know, they may have some pointed questions for you. So I appreciate you being available for that. So
yeah,
cool.
Absolutely.
All right, cool. Thank you, Kelsey, and have a good rest of your day.
Take good
I'll see
care,
you
everybody.
soon. So,
All right.
all right.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.